Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Welcome to this webinar, which is basically targeting about the way that you need to kind of prepare yourself for acing the ISACA's certified in risk and information security control exam. And this session will be delivered by Jeevan Kumar. So let's get started. So before we get started, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce Infosec Train. This is one of the finest security and technology training and consulting organization based out of India, and has been delivering multiple renowned certifications around the world, including the ones provided by ISC Squared, ISACA, and even the certifications related to the privacy related controls and a host of other specialized industry oriented certification. Founded in the year 2016 and has professionals who have more than 15 years of industry experience as elite set of trainers in their bags. And Infosec Train provides not just the training certification, they provide the consulting services as well. So Infosec Train not just provides the professional training certification, they also provide consulting services. So if you want any kind of consulting services, especially in the areas related to information technology and cybersecurity to be particular, they can provide you with resources that you could be requiring on a short to long term basis. And they also provide training and consulting solutions to customers not just in India. They have a reputation built around the world on a global scale as well. So that's a brief introduction about Infosec Train as an entity there. Before we get started, a few of the announcements that I would like to make. This session is getting recorded, and it will be available for your review at a later point in time as well. You will also get an email from the support team of Infosec Train, and a video of this particular session will also be uploaded in the YouTube channel of Infosec Train as well. The links will be shared with you so that you can refer at a later point in time. I would encourage everyone at any given point in time, if you have any questions or concerns that you would like to share with me, feel free to do that. Feel free to interrupt me. I would be acknowledging that, and I would be replying to your questions and concerns there. But unless and otherwise you have any questions, I would request your cooperation to kind of keep yourself on mute. And this webinar will be able to kind of provide you one CPE point. Okay. So a course completion certificate will be provided to you at the end of the webinar. You can claim one CPE point following the successful completion of this particular webinar. Okay. So those are some of the announcements that I wanted to make. Moving ahead, in our agenda today, over a course of 1 hour, we will start with a brief description about the trainer, about myself. We will have a brief description about what CRISC exam is all about. We will have a detailed analysis of the domains that are kind of part of this particular exam, like the from the risk identification to the assessment to the treatment and response following the control monitoring and reporting there. And we will basically also have a close look around the exam design and requirements perspective. We'll take a look at who needs this particular CRISC exam and what are the benefits that it has got. And I would also share some of my personal experience, like like how to approach the questions that are there in this particular exam there, and then we'll open it for the Q&A session at the end if you have any kind of queries or concerns that you want to get it addressed. So that is in our agenda today. So let's get started. So I am Jeevan Kumar, and a freelance instructor associated with Infosec Train. Professionally, I am a senior IT auditor, and I hold certifications like CISSP, Certified Information Systems Auditor from ISACA, Certified Risk and Information Security Control from again ISACA, and EC Council Certified Security Analyst as well. All right. So that was a brief introduction about myself. So first things first, what exactly is this exam of certified in risk and information security control? So this is a certification that has been kind of owned and delivered by ISACA. It's a globally accepted certifications and is recognized around the world, especially for those who are in the careers of risk management and internal audit functions there. And basically, having this certification will basically be demonstrating your skill sets to your prospective employers about the areas of interest, including how the enterprise risk management is kind of implemented within an organization, and how the IT and information security or information systems risk basically translate itself to the business risk, and how the information systems risk is kind of mapped to the business risk and is part of the overall enterprise risk management program or the strategy that the organization has in place. This course would also have a description around the internal control structure one needs to have within the organization, and what would be the rationale behind having a control in place within an organization. So basically, we will discuss about some of the concepts at a very high level as we delve deeper into this particular session and a webinar. The certification kind of demonstrates these skills to your prospective employers on that front. So it basically addresses the requirement for those personnel who kind of understand both the technology and are in a position to map it to the risk that the organization is about to face from an IT perspective, how to design effective mitigation strategies in order to bring that risk to a level that is acceptable within the risk appetite or risk tolerance level of the organization. Okay. It also kind of tells you like how are you going to implement your control structure, internal control structure within the organization as far as the IT security controls are considered, and how to kind of ensure that the internal control structure is aligned with the overall goals and objectives of the enterprise and business by and large. Okay. So like every other certification which ISACA offers, CRISC is also having a set of job practices, and each job practices has a series of task statements as well as the knowledge statements. And in order to be successful in passing this exam, you need to have a thorough understanding of each and every task statement that are listed out in the job practices of CRISC, as well as the knowledge statements that are kind of so basically, I was talking about CRISC. It was a brief introduction about this particular certification, which is kind of provided by ISACA, and demonstrates the skills in the areas of enterprise risk management and the internal control structure from an IT perspective that needs to be there in an organization. So it kind of provides you the required guidance, and it kind of addresses the needs of the professionals who kind of understand both the technology as well as they understand like how to uh, implement and align the effective risk management and control frameworks with the overall goals of the enterprise there. So, like every certification of ISACA, CRISC consists of job practices, and each job practice is a series of task statements and the knowledge statements in order to successfully ace this particular exam, you need to have a thorough understanding of each and every task statements and the knowledge statements that are kind of included in the curriculum of the particular exam there. Yeah, so the exams area of focus is broadly divided into four major domains or job practices, to be specific, that kind of delves into the life cycle of the entire risk management there. While the domain one talks about the IT risk identification, wherein a detailed analysis is presented about how to identify the threats, which are nothing but the negative events that the organization can face, both from an IT perspective and both from a business perspective. And these negative events are essentially identified by using a concept of threat assessment or threat modeling. It would have also the concept surrounding the vulnerability assessment. Vulnerabilities are nothing but the weaknesses that the organization has in its own enterprise that allows the negative event to kind of be successful. It can be done using a manual and automated approach. So the details around the vulnerability assessments are identified, and all these are kind of tied into the entire asset inventory that the organization has in place, and all these events are kind of combined together to develop something called as a risk scenario. And the focus of the first domain is to kind of guide you in drafting a list of risk scenarios that the organization can face in. And it would also deal in extensive detail about the applicable risk factors that could influence the threats that the organization can face, the vulnerabilities that the organization is kind of having, and overall risk scenarios that the organization is kind of having there. So it has got 27 percentage of weightage. That is approximately around 30 to 35 questions in the exam. And the second phase is where, against each of the risks and scenario that has been identified in domain one, it will identify the second phase, whereas the risk assessment phase is where you identify two important metrics there. One is for the likelihood of a risk scenario to be occurring, and the impact potential that the organization might have against each of the risk scenarios. Now, these can be assessed using a qualitative approach and a quantitative approach. Again, there are some of the additional techniques that are kind of involved in doing this assessment to identify the likelihood and the impact values against each risk scenarios, and is kind of covered in this domain as well. The third domain is where you will be kind of moving from an assessment phase to a treatment phase, wherein you come up with the different risk response strategies against the identified risks. You have different options like avoid a particular risk, or accept a particular risk, or mitigate a particular risk to reduce it to a level that is kind of acceptable within the risk appetite of the organization, or to kind of transfer a particular risk by kind of taking the in cyber security insurances and other kind of insurances that kind of is required for an organization's perspective. This domain will also be kind of helping you to do a control analysis to kind of identify what controls that you need to have in place, and why you need to have in place, and how to come up with and control. Should you be going for a quick win solution? Should you be going for something that is already there, or should you be investing in new areas of avenues there? If that is the case, how to kind of create a business case for the management so that the required budget can be allocated in order to treat that risk accordingly. So moving ahead on our content here, following the third phase, wherein you are kind of treating your identified risk, the last phase would be the kind of monitoring and reporting of the controls that you have kind of implemented. And for this, you need to kind of design certain metrics like the key risk indicators, key performance indicators, key control indicators. So these indicators would be kind of helping you to evaluate whether you are able to kind of extract the best return on investment that you have made on a particular mitigation strategy and a control framework. And those numbers are kind of constantly tracked. And if there is a threshold that has been breached, then appropriate actions are taken, and the reports against each of the metrics that has been identified, against the indicators that have been established, are kind of periodically relayed back to the senior management, to the level of the board of directors within the organization, so that they have the right amount of information to make informed business decision, so that it kind of gets aligned with effective treatment of the overall risk that the organization has in place. So that's about the first domain of the risk management there. And having stated that, let's kind of move on to the next slide over there that we have got. So basically, let's have a quick understanding about what are the kind of risks that are specifically attributed to the IT department within an organization, and how these kind of IT related risk gets translated into the overall enterprise risk, and how an organization should be developing a program to kind of marry these two kind of components together to have a robust enterprise risk management program. Okay, so always remember that your IT exists to support the business, and any weakness or any risk that one can attribute with an IT related component, it gets translated all the way to the overall organization there. So IT has always been considered as an expense by the organization. The recent trends have shown in like IT being successful in kind of so the IT management across the industry have kind of done an extensive research around how to extract the best value against the return on investment that they have been doing from an IT perspective, and ensuring that the benefit that is derived against the IT based investments is actually translated into a value delivery program that the organization has. And if the IT related expense does not kind of delivers the required value against the objective specified for that, then that would be a kind of risk. Okay. And again, most of the IT related expenses are kind of tracked at a portfolio to program to a project level, and each of these entities can have multiple risk factors attributed to it. There will be a risk factor associated with the cost. There will be a risk factor associated with the schedule of delivery for a particular project, and there will be a risk factor associated with the scope of the entire exercise there regarding that particular project development exercise there. So if any of these values change while delivering or while working on your particular project, the overall life cycle of that particular project will take a hit and would be kind of subjected to a risk that is kind of attributed as a project delivery risk. Okay. And likewise, the operations piece of it, like say for an example, your change management strategies, your configuration management strategies, your change management, configuration management, incident management, and a host of other things are kind of associated with the IT operations side of it. And that, if is not effectively managed, would be resulting in some kind of a risk that kind of translates itself into a service delivery kind of the risk. And the last piece of last but not the least piece of risk that one can attribute with the IT based solutions is the risk associated with the cyber and information security. So information security risk can translate itself through a variety of ways, like a malware attack, a ransomware attack, just because of the unpatched vulnerabilities and unnecessary services that are kind of running, the vulnerabilities that are kind of operational there. So all these risks kind of gets translated because that particular IT particular solution would be supporting a business unit, and that business unit would be supporting the enterprise organizational objectives and goals and mission at a pretty high level there. So if IT is having some instances of risk reported over there, it would eventually be having an impact on the way the business unit kind of deals with the areas of risk, and that gets eventually translated at an organizational level. And likewise, your enterprise would have its own set of risk factors as well, depending upon the geography where you're kind of doing the business, can bring in a lot of regulatory compulsions. Say, for example, if you decide to kind of expand your organization in the European Union, a significant amount of compliance requirement comes for an organization's perspective against the general data privacy regulatory requirements, the market conditions of the geography with which you are kind of operating would also have an influence. The size of the organization, your competitive market space, the cost at which the goods and services are being offered by your competitors in the market, the amount of credit that you have on roll in the market space, and the strategies regarding the business avenues that the organization is kind of deciding to kind of invest with, like the mergers, the acquisitions, and the divestiture strategies there. So all of these will have a say in kind of understanding the level of enterprise risk that the organization is about to be facing, as the risk translates itself from lower levels of IT risk all the way to an enterprise level there. So that is about the risk universe that the organization can have, and how to kind of deal with these risk universe as something that would be a very much significant focus in this particular course as well. So the focus of the first domain, as we have discussed briefly as well, is to kind of identify your risk scenarios. And in order to identify or develop your risk scenarios, first you need to have a broad asset inventory. Against each of the assets, you should be able to identify what the threats are, which are nothing but the negative events that the organization is kind of going to face. And it can range in from a malware attack or a ransomware attack to a natural hazard like a hurricane or a typhoon that the organization's facility is about to face. Once you kind of do that in this particular domain, you would also kind of identify what your existing control structures are. Like, are they adequate? Are they effective? Are they efficient in kind of addressing your risk scenarios, or do you kind of need a new control? So all these kind of approaches are kind of focused in this particular domain as well. You are going to identify your weaknesses as well by doing something called as a vulnerability assessments, wherein you would be identifying a list of vulnerabilities or the weaknesses that your organization has that allows a particular threat to materialize itself. So those are the things that kind of get covered in this particular domain as well. And on the basis of that, you would be also considering a lot of risk factors there, which kind of influences your threats and vulnerabilities, and eventually you will be kind of coming up with a risk scenario there at the end. So it can be developed using a top-down approach or a bottom-up approach. In a top-down approach, you would start with the overall enterprise business objectives, and then break it down specific to the objectives and identify the applicable scenarios. In a bottom-up approach, first you would come up with the risk scenarios from brainstorming process, and kind of prune it significantly by the time you go up and kind of map it to the overall organizational objectives. There are pros and cons of each of the approach to identify the risk scenarios there. Here, there will be also different ways wherein the organization is going to kind of identify the risk factors and the risk scenarios. Then the interviews, the system evaluation techniques, the system observation techniques are something which are covered in detail in this domain as well. So this domain would also introduce you to a concept of a RACI matrix, which is essentially a acronym that stands for responsibility, accountability, and consulted and accountable, consulted and informed. So within your organization, against each of the business process that you're running in, against each of the IT operations that are you're kind of running with, you should be designing a RACI matrix for effectively managing your risk. We will also have a detailed look around risk register at this particular course as well, which is kind of an inventory of all the risk scenarios that are identified, and is a living document that is kind of updated on a periodic basis as and when the risk factors evolve, or appropriate solutions are kind of applied there. Here we also will discuss about the risk appetite and tolerance metrics that can be kind of attributed as well. There are metrics like how much risk that the organization is willing to take, how much risk the organization is having a capacity to take, and how much deviation from the risk appetite the organization can have is something that we'll be covering in this particular domain as well. The overall risk culture of an organization that kind of allows an organization to deal with the identified risk areas is something that is also extensively covered, and how to design a risk awareness program is something that is part of this particular domain's curriculum as well. So basically, as you move ahead into the domain two, you would be essentially identifying two major areas that are kind of not included in the identification process, and that would be your likelihood and impact potential. And these are dynamic and variable parameters, and these are kind of influenced through a lot of factors, like what is the organization structure is, what the organization directives are, what the IT architecture is, how the organization treats its risk, what the existing control environment is. We'll also discuss about some of the control categories that the organization needs to have in place, depending upon the objectives that they are kind of about to achieve through those controls. It will also be having an intensive discussion about the different quantitative and qualitative approaches, or the semi-quantitative approaches the organization can take in order to kind of perform a risk assessment, and how to bring in a particular risk map. So there are different methods of risk assessment, like the cause and effect analysis, Delphi methods, checklist analysis, brainstorming, bow tie analysis. A host of other different methods are also covered in this. The different ways through which you can gather the information to do a likelihood and impact analysis, that is also covered here. The way you're kind of going to perform a gap analysis to identify the current state of your risk and your desired state of risk, that is something that is kind of covered here as well. And apart from that, it tells you about some of the control objectives as well, some of the different types of administrative controls that you have in place as well. So these are the topics that are kind of included there. I have got one question in the chat box as well. As far as the exam is concerned, how much significant is to kind of understand the this assessment methods? Yeah, so you need to kind of have a basic understanding. You do not have to go into extensive depth against each of the process, but you need to have a basic understanding on how that particular exercise is carried out, and that is included in your task and knowledge statements of the particular job practice of risk assessment, and will be tested in the exam. Moving ahead, the third domain's focus would be mostly on kind of identifying the risk response strategies. So you have got strategies like avoiding a particular risk altogether, or reducing a risk to a level that is within the acceptable limits of an organization, or you would do a control analysis and identify that the cost or the value of control yields a negative return on the investments, which is essentially identified via the asset value, subtracting the total cost of an ownership from the value of an asset. So that kind of yields a negative return on investment, and under those circumstances, you are going to kind of accept a particular risk. It will also discuss about the instances wherein you need to kind of share or transfer a risk to insurance service provider, who kind of will be taking the risks on your behalf. And some of the areas or the parameters that needs to be considered while selecting an appropriate risk response option will also be identified to against each of the risks that has been identified which exceeds the risk appetite of the organization, like what is the exposure that the risk is having, what is the efficiency of the response that will be implemented, what is the effectiveness criteria, and what are the implementation capabilities from a cost and a budget perspective that the organization has in place. So that is something that is something that you need to keep in your mind as well. So on the basis of that, you will be coming up with your risk responses, and it also kind of talks about how to prioritize. And the second set of questions that I have in the chat box is, what is the prerequisite for CRISC? I think you need to have at least 3 years of experience in the job practices that are mentioned here. And the ideal time for preparing for this CRISC exam is somewhere between 1 to 1.5 months. And the textbooks that you should be referring is the ISACA's certification review manual and the ISACA's practice questions. Both are available in the ISACA's website and can be purchased from there as well. So there are no prerequisites for having this certification, like there's no CEH or security plus prerequisite that is required for this particular certification as well. All right, so that's about the third domain. The fourth domain is about the IT risk treatment and response strategies. So this deals with about designing your key risk indicators and some of the specific attributes against each of the key risk indicators should be having. What should be your the applicable risk action plan that you need to kind of have in place. How are you going to select your key risk indicators? What would be the order of operations or order of prioritization while selecting the available risk indicators that needs to be considered as key risk indicators? Extensive discussion will also be surrounded around the security incident and event management platforms like Splunk, ArcSight, and what the objectives of having those kind of things are there. That is also something that will be covered. KPIs would also be covered in detail, that kind of evaluates how the invested controls are performing and whether they are kind of effective and efficient in achieving the overall objectives against which they are kind of implemented. And also there will be a validation of the KPIs and KRIs needs to be monitored. What would be the applicable thresholds and what actions one organization needs to take when there is a breach of a threshold there. So all these factors would be kind of contributing towards the development of a risk culture within the organization. Whether the organization will be aggressive in taking a risk, or the organization will be conservative when it comes to addressing a risk. How the organization deals with a negative outcome. Whether there is a culture of learning from the assessment areas, and whether there will be a kind of a political or a blaming culture that is existing within the organization, and how the organization's behavior is towards the compliance requirement. Those are the things that are kind of covered in this particular course as well. So those are the four domains that the exam will be having. And we discussed at a pretty high level around what the different objectives against each domains or each job practices are. From an exam's design and requirements perspective, the exam is a 4-hour exam, contains 150 questions. So you are allowed to take a 10-minute break during the exam. You would not be provided with any additional time for the breaks. ISACA has been considerate of the pandemic situation and allows you to kind of take the exam from the comfort of your home as well. All you need is a good internet connection, uninterrupted power supply, and a laptop. All the unnecessary services disabled. This exam will be proctored even if you're taking it from your home. It has got around 750, 200 to 750 is or 200 to 800 is the scale with which you will be kind of scored. I mean, your scores will be in the scale between 200 and 800, and you need to be scoring somewhere close to 450 in order to pass the exam. At the completion of the exam, you'll just get a notification of whether you have passed or failed the exam. Your official scorecard would be mailed to you within a week. Okay, and it kind of requires you to kind of have 5 years of relevant risk management experience, and kind of needs an endorsement from an existing C-risk professional as well, or someone who is part of the organization who could testify that you were working there as well. That is also a requirement there. And the cost of this exam is $575 if you have a valid ISACA membership, and $760 if you kind of do not have ISACA membership there. It is kind of targeted to any of the business analysts, towards the compliance professionals within the organization, to the IT professionals, project managers, risk professionals. It has basically serious certification has been awarded to around 18,000 professionals around the world, and it was introduced back in the year 2010. It's a vendor neutral certification. It deals with the risk management, and since it is vendor neutral, it is kind of having a lot of respect in the market space as well. You can actually target job roles of security risk strategist, IT security analyst, information security analyst, IT audit risk supervisor, and technology risk analyst. Those are the kind of the roles that you can target after achieving this particular certification. So basically, let's kind of take some of the sample questions that you can expect in the particular exam. So basically, this is a question which kind of targets like what is the primary advantage for creating and maintaining a risk register, and this is a question that has been derived from domain one. And I would like to stress that while you're kind of attempting the exam, pay close attention to the keywords like primary, the first instance, the most applicable instance, etc. Because those are the keywords that would be critical for getting a success in this particular exam. So, of the available choices, you have got like ensure that an inventory of the potential risk is maintained, collect similar data on all the identified risks within the organization. You will have another two options like run reports based on various risk scenarios and kind of record all the risk scenarios that are kind of considered during the risk identification process. So read the question twice and kind of target the most applicable scenario over here, or most applicable solution over here. So from the available choices, the most applicable answer from this given particular question would be the first one, wherein you are kind of required to ensure that an inventory of the potential risk is maintained. So once the assets and the risks are identified, the risk register is kind of used as an inventory of that risk and can help you to kind of accelerate the overall risk decision making process and establish accountability for some of the specific risks that has been identified in this question. Which one will have the most significant impact on the standard information security governance model? So the number of employees that the organization is having, the complexity of the organizational structure, the evolving legislative requirements, and the cultural differences between the physical location. So of the available choices, since there is a keyword that we have here, which is the most significant one, as you could imagine, the evolving legislative requirements can be one of the answers. That the cultural differences can also have, but the most applicable scenario, the most applicable answer against this question will be the complexity of the organizational structure. So information security governance models are kind of highly dependent on the complexity of the org structure. Elements that actually can affect your org structure can include multiple business units, dispersion from multiple functions across the organization, multiple leadership hierarchies, multiple lines of communication. As and when the complexity of the organization grows, the impact on the governance model is also significantly increases as well. So my 2 cents for you would be to kind of read each question twice, read each options twice, and again read the question, and be considerate about these keywords like the most applicable scenario, the primary applicable scenario, or the first applicable scenario. And on the basis of that, you should be able to kind of identify like what would be the most applicable answer against that particular requirement there. Okay. So the question says, what is a better approach? Whether you need to read the whole manual and then take the practice questions, or to read one domain and practice the questions of that domain and then go for the second domain. I would recommend the latter, or the second approach there. So you can read one domain. There are questions at the end of that particular domain. You will have around 20 questions. And in the question bank as well, which ISACA has published, has got around 150 questions as well in each of the domains. So you can kind of practice those questions. And trust me, the most effective mechanism, or most effective way that you can learn is to do as many as questions possible, because that would be kind of giving you an insight around how the concepts that are being learned are applied on a real world scenarios. Those questions are very nice and has been designed in a manner to kind of prepare you for the exam. It targets some of the specific concepts that are there within that particular exam. So if you're kind of identifying instances wherein you answered incorrectly while solving the questions from the practice question bank, then you can always have a choice to go back and kind of refer to that particular specific concept and review it and identify if there are any areas of improvement there. So I hope I have answered the question. And so my approach has always been, regardless of the certification that I am attempting, to kind of take each question at a time, give the required importance that it deserves. Okay. So basically, you will be getting around for 150 questions. So you have easily around 3 to 4 minutes available for each of the questions that you have got. Give the question the required set of importance that it deserves. Read the question twice, read the options twice, identify these key phrases like most, best, or first before selecting and recording an answer. Read the instructions carefully before kind of going to attempt an answer. There is no negative marking, there is no penalty on this particular exam. So grading is solely based on the number of questions that you have answered appropriately and correctly. Do not miss any question. Attempt all the 150 questions, and that's and give the questions give the questions the desired amount of respect that it deserves. All right. So basically, that was about my approach on how I would approach this particular CRISC exam, and that's the entire theme of it. So Infosec Train has an upcoming course on CRISC that will be delivered on the weekend evening in India. The dates would be from May 8 and 9, that weekend, all the way till 29 and 30 of May. The timing will be 7 p.m. through 11 p.m. You can visit the website infosectrain.com, and also send your queries to sales at infotrain.com in order to kind of get more details about the pricing and the other stuff as well. You can also get yourself connected to the toll-free number 1800 8437 890. That is something that you can get connected with and get more information about additional information or queries that you have regarding this course. So this will be having around 40 hours of training. You will be provided access to the recorded sessions for around 180 days after the completion of a particular session. You'll be getting the textbook, the practice question bank. You will also be provided an access to an exam prep engine that has kind of got the mock tests, and it will be supported with ample of question banks. You'll be provided with post-training support as well. and Infosec Train also kind of provides a money back guarantee as well, subjected to certain terms and conditions. Those are kind of there in the website as well. So that was it around the webinar's content. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for taking some precious time of your busy calendar and attending this session. And it was pleasure talking to you. All right.